Are the Steelers about to be real competitors in the AFC? Some signs point to yes. We're going to talk about some of those signs with a guy who I've respected for so many years and has covered the Steelers for so many years, who brings a lot of insight, and an article that he wrote over this weekend that I think sheds a lot of light on the path the Steelers are on right now. We got Jim Wexell coming on the show. We'll talk about that with him. We'll also talk about his thoughts on Matt Canada, the Steelers coaching situation, what they're going to do with that, and some draft insight from a man who studied the NFL draft of the Pittsburgh Steelers for such a long time. It's going to be a fun Locked On Steelers episode. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on the video if you enjoyed. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Just pick 2 to 5 players. If you guess more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can up to 10 times your money on any entry. First time users receive up to a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's LOCKEDON, Locked On at prizepicks.com. As I said before, we have a special guest here. He's been on the show before, and I'm so happy to bring him back. It's Jim Wexell. You can find him in a lot of places. You can find him writing for 24/7 Sports. You can find him as the publisher of the Steel City Insider. You can also find his new book, which I have right here, which I haven't finished yet, Jim. I apologize, but, you know, Steelers pit seasons get me tired out, but I'm working on it. But it's really good what I've read. But his new book is On the Clock, Behind the Scene with the Pittsburgh Steelers at the NFL Draft, with a foreword by Craig Wolfley, former Steeler himself. Jim does great work. I read his Polamalu book. Awesome. If you haven't read that, you should go pick up as well. But this is his newest work. I suggest you check it out. You can check it out at his website, jimwexell.com. And you can check it out at a lot of different bookstores. So do check that out. But we're going to talk to a lot of things. Jim, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us, man.
Chris, there's no way I'm going to be able to talk that fast.
That's just how I move. You move at your pace, man. I got to get my things out because they're not as important as the things that you say. You can take your time.
Well, I tell you, that was a heck of an intro, and I thank you for all of that. And I also want to say I think you and there's several good young reporters covering the Steelers right now. I think it's a really good wave. You know, we could talk about Kenny Pickett and George Pickens, but there's a good wave of Steeler reporting coming up with you and Nick and Noah and those guys. So I'm honored that you guys include the old guys every now and then. So I appreciate it.
We appreciate you, Jim. You've been on it for a long time. But I wanted to highlight something that it was a really great piece that you wrote over the weekend. I texted you as much, and I encourage everyone to read it. But it was called Ignore the Elevator Music that you wrote for Steel City Insider at 247sports.com. But Jim, it talked a lot about the elevator music metaphor. First of all, very much a Tomlinism. He brings it up all the time, but ignoring the things that don't matter and everything. But right. Your point was, for all the people who think the Steelers could be good and want the Steelers to be good, there's a lot of people who say, no, they haven't been good. They haven't won a playoff game in 6 years. 9-8 with this roster isn't good enough to suggest that they'll get better. But you brought up several important things. I think you brought a lot of context to situations, because oftentimes when people say, "Oh, well, they lost 6 straight, they haven't won a playoff game in 6 years," they gloss over why those things happen. And I thought that in your article you detail it year by year, incident by incident, thing after thing that are like, hey, you know what? They could have done this better, but this thing over here was a huge part of this reason. And they're rebuilding right now and finding ways to grow with guys who can be core pieces moving forward. Jim, I wanted you to give our audience just a sort of synopsis look, or your general look at if the Steelers are on the cusp of maybe putting together a core that fans are going to really enjoy for some special seasons.
Well, I'm excited, and I just don't understand why most aren't excited. I don't understand the negativity, and it was what, a couple of weeks since the end of the season or something. But I was telling some of my friends who were writing similar columns that I did, I would say, just ignore the elevator music, ignore that stuff. But it kept compounding. It wouldn't stop. And then I don't know if the media influenced the people, but it's like an overwhelming tidal wave of negativity. And I don't understand why. They finished 7-2 with a rookie quarterback, a new offensive line. 12 of the 17 players who were playing on offense were first or second year guys with the team, guys like Mason Cole included. But most of those 12 were first and second year guys. Freiermuth was hurting down the stretch. I thought it was very exciting, very a regeneration. I was excited. And, Pickett, I mean, he really impressed me in the preseason, and I didn't think he was ready right away, and neither did Mike Tomlin.
Right.
And when he was, I don't know if he was thrown in, but when he was put in, I thought it was the right time. I thought that decision was the right decision. I hesitated when Mitch looked so good in a relief effort. I thought the next week Mitch may resume, but as Tomlin said, we don't blow in the wind. He stuck with his guy, put Pickett back in, and it's all paying off. I just thought it was a tremendous coaching job. Now, you want to go back to the previous playoff losses. I'll just bend that around what you had said. I think you were being a little sarcastic of what fans were saying, that the 80s are ahead. I think we just went through the 80s.
That's an interesting point there, Jim.
This was the same problem that Don Shula had with Dan Marino. Even when Dan Marino got hurt, I believe they bottomed out at 6-10 and had a regenerative draft. But Marino was that kind of guy that could step in, and he stepped into a veteran team, and they went to the Super Bowl right away, right? Just like Ben did. Ben was a rookie, stepped into a veteran team. Well, the veteran team got old, and the rookie moved into his prime. So what you had, and the same with Marino, you had this great quarterback, and you couldn't really rebuild because your coaching was good. Just as in Chuck Noll's era, through the 80s, but they didn't have Bradshaw through the 80s. He was just as old as Joe Green and all those guys. And they all went at the same time. Well, this was an odd dynamic where Ben Roethlisberger was just moving into his prime when that team needed rebuilt. So I think we went through the 80s, and there's also psychological effects. I remember the 80s, and I remember people would write to us, would write to the, call in Myron Cope talk show. Even young players would complain, all we hear about is the 70s. It's just too big for us. Well, I don't know that these players heard all about the aughts and the Aaron Smith, the Ferrier, the Polamalu, all those guys. That was a great, great team. They were special people. You are from the town with a great football team, but it's not your birthright. There have been 2 special groups in 10 decades, okay? You don't just automatically get a special group. You're denigrating these special, how special those guys were, Hines Ward and all those guys, by saying just rebuild. And, with Ben, 2 things. The monstrous quarterback cap, the hit on his salary in a salary cap. And the other thing was, he made sure they didn't get that regenerative draft. And he did miss a season, and they still kept Tomlin's streak alive. And so as Tomlin's streak continued, I think, and there were no playoff wins, people became upset. And I think when he went 9-8 this year, I think people became upset, writers, media. I don't understand why, but it seemed like now here comes he hasn't won a playoff game. And that has been the late week media call, that he hasn't won a playoff game. And you could tell me all the other guys who have won playoff games. Zach Taylor won 2. Okay. Hey, he's got a generational quarterback, the number 1 pick of a draft, generational receiver. Both of them are on rookie contracts unless they've fixed that. Cincinnati's not one to arbitrarily give money out.
No, I agree.
And, I went through the playoff losses. And, either AB was hurt or Bell was hurt or both were hurt or Shazier was paralyzed.
Yeah.
I just looked through the 70s. That's why I was a little late joining you. I was looking through the 70s. The Steelers played 18 playoff games in the 70s. Franco missed one. One of those 18, Franco missed one. They lost it. John Stallworth missed one. They won it. They never were without Swan, Bradshaw, or Webster. I'm looking at the Hall of Famers.
Hall of Famers, yeah.
Jack Ham did miss the 1979 playoffs, and they still went 3-0. So kudos to them. And Joe Green missed one, and they won that. It was a first-round game. Same, Stallworth missed a first-round game. They were healthy. How do you think? How do the Ravens feel right now?
Yeah,
they won that game with Lamar Jackson. We can argue about whether Lamar Jackson's a legitimate championship quarterback, but he is their quarterback.
He's the straw that stirs their drink. He's
their
not.
Drink.
Yeah, he's that guy. Jim, let's keep talking about this because actually I wanted to move on to Matt Canada talk, but this is still so fascinating. We're going to stick with this when we come back from the break here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. So let's keep this talk going. But first, I got to talk to you guys about Prize Picks. Prize Picks is, as I said before, is daily fantasy made easy. Listen, all you got to do instead of playing all these other daily fantasy games where you're picking lineups and competing against thousands of people, Prize Picks is a much easier way to make money. You just pick 2 to 5 players on a weekend and say, I have a beat on their day. I'm gonna look at their numbers. Prize Picks projects them to get this many yards, this many touchdowns, this many sacks. You guess more or less. If you hit, you make money, and you can make up to 10 times your money on any entry when you play Prize Picks. You're not competing against others. You're just trying to beat the house. So go get Prize Picks right now. You can do it with the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, Major League Baseball, college sports, and so much more. Go to Prize Picks right now. You can download it on your mobile device, or you can go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play right away. And first-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON, Locked On, for the promo code when you go to prizepicks.com or download the Prize Picks app. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter here with our guest, Jim Wexell, author of On the Clock, Behind the Scenes with the Pittsburgh Steelers at the NFL Draft. You should check it out anywhere you can buy books. Jim, I wanted to switch to Matt Canada. We're going to stick with this for just a little bit longer because you were talking about, the playoff losses and things like that. I think something that does need to be addressed is the pace of how winning with quarterbacks that you pay a lot of money. When you do that, like the Steelers tried to do in the 2010s, like the Packers tried to do in the 2010s, like the Saints tried to do in the 2010s, it is not as easy as you think. It puts a lot of emphasis on that quarterback to come through and deliver with the kind of money that they're earning against the team's salary cap. When I looked back, and I looked at over the last 3 playoff losses since 2017 that the Steelers have had, and there were 12 drives in those 3 games where the Steelers were either tied or were within a single possession of a score that they had the ball. And in all of those drives, I believe they had 8 punts, a fumble, a turnover on downs, and 2 interceptions. And in those drives, Ben Roethlisberger's passer rating was 24. And this isn't to say Ben stinks or is terrible, but when you build your roster with that quarterback, if you're going to win Super Bowls, you need that quarterback more times than not to be the guy. And being the guy means winning on those types of drives. And on top of that is when you're missing your superstar running back or your superstar linebacker or your superstar wide receiver, there's more emphasis put on the quarterback to deliver in those moments. And I think that's such a big part of what happened with the Steelers, like you said, with Don Shula and Dan Marino not being able to do that. There are certain things that have to happen when you're constructing a roster. And I think the Bengals are in a position where, like you said, they're benefiting from a 5th overall pick in Jamar Chase, a 1st overall pick in Joe Burrow. But in a couple years, they got to pay both of them guys. And people always talk about, and you another thing that you've probably heard from the people that want to be negative about the Steelers, they talk about the $100 million defense and the most expensive defense. But you know who paid the second most amount of money on a defense this year and also spent over $100 million? The Cincinnati Bengals. You know why they could do that? They got a quarterback who's on a rookie deal who's playing phenomenally, and that's building them right now. I think the Steelers have a chance over the next 4 seasons to keep the defense along the lines that they've had, which as far as the talent that they've been able to amass. And if that offense continues to build, they'll be a team that's overloaded with talent. And if Kenny Pickett grows in the way that you and I have been seeing him grow, I think that they're banging with some of these big dogs that we saw in the playoffs.
It's off to a really good start. They have the makings of a special group. I mean, look at the pillars on defense. TJ, hey, man, Cam gets better every week, so I'm going to stop worrying about how old he is.
It's crazy.
So, you know, you have 3 pillars on defense. And by the way, the highest paid defense didn't play so well because the reason they were the highest paid defense was injured.
Yeah. TJ Watt was gone for 2 months, and he was $30 million.
And he was ineffective for the most part when he came back until he started flashing at the end there. Yeah. Yeah, that quarterback hit. I'd like to do a real study on, you know, Russell Wilson won. You know, Peyton Manning did win. So there are guys that win while absorbing a huge cap hit. Tom Brady, you know, all the studying I do, all the numbers I crunch and the reasoning that I put into my articles are always just trashed when someone says, well, what did Belichick do? What did Brady do? Well, I mean, that was an anomaly that we've never seen before. The only other guy who's done what the Steelers, when they went into the 10s after that special group started retiring and they kept winning, only Joe Gibbs and Bill Belichick had ever put up those kind of win percentages that the Steelers were doing after a Super Bowl group, after a team that went to 3 Super Bowls in 6 years. It was a special group. Okay. And they kept winning. But, you know, when you start, you know, the quarterback, he walked out of here with $250 million in his pocket. He was paid $250 million by the Steelers. And those superstars were making money too. So when they're injured, you know, the rest of the team is just not special. I mean, I went through some of the names: Kobe Hamilton, Mark Barron, Cam Thomas, Bryce McCain. It went on and on and on. It was patching this stuff in. And Tomlin's not totally above blame. They did lose, but you're right. The quarterback didn't play all that well. He was getting old. And, you know, Ben's game, a lot of it was on youthful physicality back when he was winning Super Bowls. I don't want to denigrate him because I would have held on to him too for as long as they did.
You hold on to Hall of Fame players. You
treat them with the respect that they deserve. And he was still healthy enough. He had his arm rebuilt. I thought his long ball, you know, his deep ball was really the accuracy of his deep ball. Was really underrated during his time. And we're really seeing it with, you know, Kenny doesn't have that. No. And I think that might be Kenny's biggest flaw. And I don't know that it's that big of a flaw, especially when you've got a guy like George Pickens with that catch radius and that speed, and he's going to make up for some inaccuracy down deep. But, you know, we watch Kenny in practice, and we're just so used to those guys running under Ben stuff. Ben just had a knack to lay it up there, and we just thought it was, you know, practice, lazy, deep throws, but those guys ran under it. They're not running under Kenny stuff. And, you know, he can work on it. And really, that's a part of the game that I think it's part of the reason we saw so many 3rd and 1 deep balls with Ben. And I'm kind of glad they're not doing that anymore.
I agree. I think there's structurally just better things you can do. And I think you're right. Kenny Pickett's game is not, hey, really fast guy, Mike Wallace, you know, insert receiver here, Martavis Bryant. I'm going to lob this bomb and you can go get it. And Ben Roethlisberger was so good at putting it in spots that those guys could go win those things. And I think when the Steelers become a more complete offense that teams have to honor so many different things like the run game, like we saw this year, if they can make that a consistent threat, Kenny Pickett will get more one-on-one opportunities downfield where he doesn't have to throw the ultimate perfect bomb. He just has to put it in a spot and let his guys do that. I think that day will come, but I think that what we have seen is he can hit those 20, 30-yard passes on a dime and put them in really good spots in competitive positions. And that, to me, if you're able to do that and he's able to improve his vision and his sight, those are the things. Those don't go away with time. Like, Ben Roethlisberger, like you said, his biggest asset was Terrell Suggs could hit him. He could throw him off and he would throw a touchdown. Like that. That's Big Ben did that. And that's why they called him Big Ben. It was just ridiculous. But as time went on, Ben was never the ultimate, scheme reader. There were times that he had a hot day where he knew what you were doing. He was ready for that. But there were too many days, in my opinion, to call him to the greatest reader of defenses or anything like that. He's not on the Tom Brady. He's not even close to the Tom Brady or the Peyton Manning, just schematic level of breaking you down. And I think that in his older age, the biggest thing he had to his availability, to his abilities, was that, as Mike Tomlin said, he always stayed here when it was fourth quarter and you needed a 2-minute drill and the defenders are panicking because they're like, oh, it's the game's on the line. Ben Roethlisberger didn't flinch in those moments. He often was who he was going to be in those moments, and he would hold through. But I think Kenny Pickett, if he's the guy I think that I covered at Pitt, and he continues to grow, and he can grow in the same way that he grew at Pitt in the NFL for the Steelers, I think he's a guy that when he gets older, because everyone talks about his age and how he's not 21, he's 24, 25, whatever. He's also, we call him 30 already. But when he gets to be 33, 34, and we're talking about, we're having this discussion in another decade, and we're talking about, wow, what's he still have? The smarts can still be there. The experience can still be there. That was what Peyton Manning had for him when he went to the Broncos. His arm wasn't as good as it was when he started with Indy, but he could still get the ball in a lot of places, and he knew how to do it in creative ways. Tom Brady didn't have the best arm for the last couple of Super Bowls he won with the Patriots, but he knew where to put the football, and he knew how to attack defenses. And I think that's what Kenny Pickett's going to bring for the Steelers in the long term. And it's something that I think will contribute to a roster that can try to rebuild around him and say, hey, you know what? Maybe Kenny Pickett isn't making the $50 million contract like an Aaron Rodgers is, and it allows you just to build more around him. But again, smart quarterbacking can help you win in those situations when you are kind of limited in how you can add around them.
And he's going to be that smart quarterback. And you're right. I don't mean to denigrate his arm. I'm just
no
ball accuracy. We're just so used to watching Ben at practice every day. That's all.
Yep.
That's all. And so he's got the intermediate arm. He could throw those intermediate outs, which is that's such an important throw. He can get him in all the windows. There's a lot to like. Now, obviously, they warned him, be careful over the middle. But they didn't. It wasn't the scheme. There were receivers open in the middle of the field, throwing their hands up. Apparently, they did not tell the receivers that we're not going over the middle. They told Pickett to be careful over the middle. And so, those receivers were a little frustrated because they were open a lot. And Kenny started picking them up at the end of the year. So if you do want to get into the Canada thing, we have a guy that breaks down tape, and you break down all 22 film too. Mm-hmm. It just isn't as bad as people want to say. I don't know that it's as sophisticated maybe as the 49ers, because that's what I'm hearing a lot of. Why can't they have what the 49ers have? Because the 49ers really have a nice looking running game, and it's very similar to what the Steelers are doing. Mm-hmm. So now people are saying, well, they need a pass game coordinator. Well, I don't know that I don't know enough. Chris, I don't know X's and O's as well as you, and I don't know that the pass game was what do they want to call it? Caveman-like. But I do know that Kenny Pickett was missing a lot of people in the middle of the field and deep, and they do have the receivers. And I don't know how much more they need, and I think Mike Tomlin would know that. So maybe he's waiting for a guy to get out of the playoffs. To begin talking to a new coordinator, maybe Frank likes balking at the money, or maybe they're going to go with Canada. I don't know. I haven't heard anything. I made some calls today. People I talked to don't know. And I've saw the rumor about Byron Leftwich on Twitter. It just seems too easy to put together because Byron Byron's playing tonight. And,
yeah.
and there was supposed to be some kind of unhappiness with Byron down in Tampa. Well, that's where he is, isn't he?
Yeah, he's the offensive coordinator for the Buccaneers. Hold on, Jim. Let's get back to this because this goes right into my Matt Canada point. I got to do a quick ad read here. We'll continue this talk because that is where we're going with this episode. But we also do want to talk to you guys about our great sponsors at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your #1 source for all your betting stats and sports information. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including the NFL playoffs that's going on right now. As we're recording this, the Buccaneers and the Cowboys haven't played, but as soon as that's over and you're watching this or listening to this, you're going to have the chance to find out how you put money down on the rest of the NFL playoffs, but also the NBA, the NHL, and much, much more. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action when you visit BetOnline, where the game starts. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter, Jim Wexell. Jim, let's get right back into this offensive coordinator talk because there's all the talk about Matt Canada. Will he stay? Will he go? Who knows? And I want to get your thoughts on that. But you beat me to the punch. Byron Leftwich, the rumors are floating that he isn't happy in Tampa Bay. It hasn't worked out. There's some mutual disagreements there. Maybe he gets floated. And there's the rumor that maybe the Steelers are waiting for him to be let go from Tampa Bay whenever they get bounced out of the playoffs, unless Tom Brady goes full Tom Brady and, wins his 8th Super Bowl or whatever. But they're waiting for that. They're waiting for that to happen for them to bring to the Steelers. I think Byron Leftwich has done some interesting things in his time with the Buccaneers. There's been some people who haven't liked some of his things that he's done in Tampa, but I'm kind of with you. Like, I'm not all that certain that that's definitely what's going to happen here. Like, a lot of people are trying to make this out to be like it's some grand, it's some grand master plan that's in the works. I don't get the sense that the Steelers are definitely out on Matt Canada. Do you get that sense, or am I missing something there, or are they going to let him kind of get one more go at this?
Well, he has another year on his contract.
Right.
They like to honor contracts.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Like I said, I've made some calls. The people I talk to don't know. I likened this to 2000. Somebody mentioned this to me, and the 2000 team turned it around finally after a couple bad years. Finally got their quarterback situation straight. They had a young quarterback with Cordell. They got it turned around. They finished 9-7, and boom, Cowher fired Kevin Gilbride. It was kind of a surprise, but I don't know that Gilbride was any more popular than Matt Canada. But it took some courage for Cowher to do that at a time when everything looked hopeful. And man, he promoted Mularkey, brought in Wisenhunt, brought in Russ Grimm, that set up the staff that won a Super Bowl. And then they won another one later. But that takes some guts, and so I would be excited if Tomlin showed that kind of guts.
Yeah.
Only because everything is going smoothly. Why change now? But when Cowher did it, and somebody told me he had a little help from Dan Rooney. Now, this is a different Rooney, and this is not Cowher.
Right.
And you just wonder. It would be exciting if Tomlin did buck the trend, because I'm not paying attention to the fans. I'm paying attention to the way they turned it around. You would think Matt Canada would be safe with a year left on his contract because of that. But it would be exciting because that would mean Tomlin was dissatisfied in some way.
Yeah.
And I can't say which way. I don't know enough about X's and O's to say whether Matt Canada can do it or not, because he had a rookie quarterback, a new line, and everything turned around. And I love a good running game, but you got to be able to pass with some sophistication. And as long as Tomlin's confident in that aspect, okay, I can see keeping him. I would have no problem either way. I hope they don't keep him just because they're nice and don't want to fire people and want to run out his contract. I would rather, you know what I'm saying? If they know, do it one way or the other, but do it with your convictions, not because he's got another year left on his contract.
No, I feel you on that. And there's other guys like, Frank Reich, Nathaniel Hackett, NFL head coaches that just got fired who, are more offensive minded coaches who could fill in there. And I'm sure there's the young offensive minds who we're not talking about right now because we're not scoping the scene for receiver coaches and quarterback coaches and people that could jump into that role and become ultimate play callers. Mike Tomlin was a defensive mind that, before he was hired by the Pittsburgh Steelers, not a lot of Steelers fans and media were talking about him as the guy who could be the next Super Bowl champion head coach for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But my point being, and I think it's your being, there's a lot out there right now. I agree that I've been one, during the season, I was like, they should not fire Matt Canada mid-season. When you have a rookie quarterback, just kind of stay the course for now. Let's see how this plays out. At the end of the season, if you feel like you got the move, go get it. But I think the one thing, and this has been my theory, and I've said this for a few shows now, and I'd like your feedback on this, Jim. I think one thing that they've not that might have been pushing against them getting a top of the line, hot off the presses, super genius offensive coordinator type of guy who was really ambitious, might have been just because where they were offensively. When Todd Haley left after 2017, Randy Fichtner took over the offense because he was Ben's guy. But when Randy Fichtner left, and when they even hired Matt Canada as the quarterback's coach, this was an offense that you had an old man, Ben Roethlisberger, who was coming off the surgery. He was still stuck on the team for multiple years. And it wasn't sure when he was going to retire. The offensive line was aging out. Le'Veon Bell was gone. Antonio Brown was gone, and didn't necessarily have, all the assets lined up. And if you're an offensive ambitious, a guy who wants to build his first big offensive coordinator job or sign somewhere where he can flex his muscles on the offensive side of the ball, that might not be the spot that you want to go to until they figure out what the future is going to be. Because then if the offense stinks and it's not really your fault because you had an old quarterback with a kind of rebuilding offense, then that's tied to your legacy forever. But now, and this is where I'd like your feedback to is it different now? Because now you see the rookie quarterback, George Pickens, Najee Harris, and all these other players. You see the potential for an offense. Is that something that you think might have played into the lack of getting newer people from outside the organization?
Well, if there's one criticism I have of Mike Tomlin, it's that he really hasn't come up with hotshot young assistant coaches.
I agree.
And so I don't, it could just be a continuation of that. And I'm still unsure whether Canada can or can't, because the guy that does our all 22, he's a coach. He knows what he's talking about. He doesn't want to say he likes Canada. He says he wouldn't get rid of them. He would keep doing things. But he says there were people open all over the field. It was Pickett. It was a rookie quarterback, people. Rookie quarterback. Yes. And he'll get better, and he got better. But I can't answer your question about I really don't know what's out there, and I don't know what he passed over, and I don't know if it was just because of the reasons that you said. Mm-hmm. I'll just say this about Leftwich. I covered him. I loved him, and I know the team loved him. Mm. He had a lot of character, a lot of insight, a very good leader. And Tomlin had him. And they got along great. And he was the backup to Ben in 2008. Mm. And I don't know what he's doing in Tampa, but I do know they won a Super Bowl. Was he the coordinator then?
Yes, he was.
Well, so maybe. Very interesting there. And it's easy to tie it in. And that rumor, it sounds good, but it's also easy to come up with that rumor just to tying all the pieces together. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a tricky situation, and I prefer. I don't know when offensive coordinators and defense coordinators, for that matter, became such a part of the argument. It's really it's becoming more important than players to the fans, and so I don't know did we even know Chuck Noll's offensive coordinator, but well, that's neither here nor there.
But look, I wanted before we go or anything, because we did talk. I wanted to get your thoughts there, but I wanted to hear your thoughts on what the Steelers should target in the draft and what you feel. I mean, you have this great book that you have here. Again, I'm still working my way through it, but I'm learning stuff that I didn't know. And you know me, I'm always trying to pick up information about what the Steelers do and their practices and their histories of how they've handled the NFL draft. But based off of the things that you understand, where do you see this team going this year?
Well, you know, when I wrote the book and started marketing it, it was very exciting because you had thought they would have a top 10 pick and that the draft was more important than the talk that we're engaging in right now. So the marketing has fell off a little bit, but now I think it's a perfect history book. I'm sure a young guy like you's learning a lot about the history of the team, and it's in storytelling form, so it's not encyclopedic. But where do I think they're going? I understand that the inside linebacker core in free agency is strong, and I think that's a weakness. We can be excited all we want about Mark Robinson, but they only used him against a team that ran the ball, told you they were running the ball, was running the ball, and he came downhill. And so there's some potential there, but I don't think you can say, well, we have Mark Robinson, we don't need to get another linebacker. Miles Jack was, was this a continuation of his knee issues in Jacksonville? It was a groin, but here again, he's missing time. And, Spillane's the best guy they have. So I think that's a spot they need a guy. And so I'm assuming free agency because I hear it's so loaded. And wouldn't it be really cool if they got the Bills, Edmonds from the Bills?
Hey, it's not like this team doesn't know how to assemble brothers on a roster. But Tremaine Edmonds absolutely would be the guy there. I do think that's the move. But I agree. Inside linebacker, big thing that they could address. But I think it's also a unique position. How often do the Steelers have a pick like they do from the trade from the Chase Claypool trade with the Bears? To be, they can afford to be aggressive this year. They can say, hey, you know what? We're getting 3 guys in the top 50, top 47 or whatever it is. I think you might see the Steelers go out on some limbs in this draft, maybe even make some trades to move around because Omar Khan, this is his first chance to put his blueprints or to put his fingerprints, into the organization as far as the draft and definitely his and not Kevin Colbert's or deciding where these will be his. I'm intrigued to see, what the plan is there and Andy Weidel being brought in, what direction they go. Well,
they'll be Mike Tomlin's picks.
Of course.
Guaranteed of that. I mean, once they get into the 3rd round and Mike says, hey, I don't know these guys. Have at it, Andy. And Omar will oversee it. And I hope – I really don't want to see Omar try to make a mark. I think they've made their mark. I think they've – with that high pick for Claypool. I'd hate to get bogged down in assigning a position. Draft, you really have the makings of a special group. Don't stop. When the Steelers went into the 74 draft, they had some special players. They had a quarterback on the rise. They had Joe Green. They had the 71 draft was fantastic. Don't get bogged down in positions. And but that said, they need secondary help. They need a corner. I really like what Levi Wallace did, and I want Levi Wallace on my team, and I want Cam Sutton as, Cam will kill me for when he hears this, but I want Cam as my number 2. I think he's an ideal number 2. Obviously, he will be the number 1 until the rookie you draft becomes that guy.
Right.
And that's theoretical, but I would like to see a corner at 17, unless you see a Hall of Fame lineman on either side of the ball. One of those guys like a DeCastro falls to you. One of those guys that are going to lead your locker room for the next 10, 15 years. That's what those guys do. They police your locker room like Cam does now. So I don't necessarily need an offensive lineman because I'm not as down on Dan Moore as other people seem to be. And I think you can get an interior guy, maybe in the 3rd round, that second round pick. Or unless, if Dave DeCastro falls, great.
Awesome. Right. Yeah.
You don't need to, I don't think you need to push, you better have somebody you love in mind. And but that first round pick, I think it's time for a corner, and I don't buy into the perception that they can't gauge cornerbacks.
I mean, Cam Sutton's one of their picks, and he's doing just fine right now. So
right. And their second round pick that they drafted, Senquez Golson,
just got hurt
on the first day of practice.
Yeah,
injured.
I think that there's Steelers fans who look at Artie Burns, and that was a miss that happened. But all teams miss at times. I think that if they had a chance, if a Christian Gonzalez from Oregon falls to them, I think if Brian Branch falls to them, a lot of people talk about Joey Porter Jr. because he's the easy name out there, but I think there's a lot of really good corners in this draft class that they could get with their first round pick or their 32nd overall pick that they got from the Bears. I think there's a lot of really talented guys they can add there. And like you said, I wouldn't put away defensive line, linebacker, offensive line from any of those. You're right. The Steelers need to stay the best player available. I think when they've made the mistakes of guys that they've reached for that didn't work out, I think it was like Artie Burns when I think they stuck to the cornerback position because it was a needy spot when William Jackson III was taken away by the Bengals. And then, with the linebacker position, because they were so desperately trying to fill the Ryan Shazier spot, they traded up to get Devin Bush, who early on looked like it was working out. Like, in the first year and a half, he looked fine, but his injury happened, and he's kind of who he is, and I think he's just going to hit free agency, and that's going to be that, and they're going to reload at the linebacker position. But I think their best drafts come from when they're just saying, hey, you know what? This is the guy we think is the best player on the board. We're going to take him, and we're going to make it work. So I think the Steelers should keep that plan of attack. It'll yield the best results. And I think that one of the ways that you can learn about how that has led to some of their best results is read Jim Book on the clock behind the scenes with the Pittsburgh Steelers at the NFL draft. Jim, thanks so much for joining us. We're over our time. Otherwise, I could keep talking to you for 2 more days, and we'd have a live stream going forever. But we'll definitely have you back soon to talk more about the Steelers because as much as anybody on the planet about this organization. So check Jim out. He's at jimwexel.com where you can buy his books On the Clock with the Pittsburgh Steelers NFL Draft. Also his Polamalu book if you want to learn more about the great legend Troy Polamalu. You can also check him out as the publisher of the Steel City Insider at 24/7 Sports. So Jim, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate you as always. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We'll see you then.